The first inklings of changes in art during the modern period were subtle, and they involved both subject matter and style. English Romantic artists like John Constable began sketching and doing very quick paintings outdoors. They painted ordinary subjects like farms and clouds. It was not easy to paint outside with oils yet because these paints dried very quickly. They worked on very small canvases, sometimes only 8 or 10 inches square, often sketchy, and they were never intended as finished works. What's important is that Constable studied clouds closely, even read about them in new meteorological texts, and applied what he learned to his landscape painting. Constable painted the same rural areas over and over. What intrigued him was the way that weather changed, the way the landscapes looked. And he also paid particular attention to the different kinds of vegetation and shrubbery. Salisbury Cathedral was one of his favorite subjects. He painted it from various different angles, sides, and in all kinds of weather. That was a change, since academic artists were in the habit of painting very idealized skies. Like other Romantic artists, Constable was interested in the scientific, but also the different emotional responses that weather could evoke, and it was important to him that the weather looked accurate. In France, Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot painted small landscapes like Forest of Fontainebleau, 1846, identifying the particular geographical area. Corot is associated with the Barbizon School, a group of artists working out of Barbizon, France, near the Fontainebleau area. They painted landscapes for the most part and preferred a more realist approach. Like Constable, Corot liked going to the actual site, sketching the landscape, and then finishing the painting in his studio. These artists were not necessarily interested in making grandiose statements about life, but they were interested in painting pictures of specific places simply because they existed. They were important to the country or the people in the area, or they were interesting to the artist. Rosa Bonheur was a real anomaly, a female artist who preferred painting animals, often work animals like horses or cattle, which you see in the 1848 painting, Plowing at the Nineveh region. Plowing was considered an inappropriate subject for a woman, but Bonheur did not care, nor was she interested in romanticizing or idealizing the scene. She paid attention to details, to what she was looking at, and that meant focusing on the animals and the furrowed ground. Although technically it would fit into the category of genre paintings, that is a picture that showed everyday life among ordinary people. She really focused on cattle, and that was considered a very odd subject for a painting. This deliberate artistic choice of everyday subjects and an interest in painting those subjects as realistically as possible ultimately developed into what we call realism, the first movement of modern art. It's important to stop for a moment and discuss this notion of movements. While artists were interested in making changes, they did not necessarily name these movements or even think in terms of movements. That kind of formalization happens later and is generally the work of art historians. Art history began in Europe as a university discipline in the 19th century. Like any other university discipline, math or science, for example, it focused on a specific area of cultural production. In this case, it was fine art. Like any other discipline, art historians developed theories and methodologies to talk about art, to analyze it, and to categorize it. It's important to remember that art historians are scholars, not painters or sculptors, so their focus is academic. They are interested in the historical development, the subject matter, the influences, the way that art and art making intersect with culture and history. Since the changes in modern art often happened quickly and overlapped, it seemed like a practical organizational strategy to identify the movements with different names. It's also important to remember that, like other scholars, art historians wrote articles, books, gave lectures, and taught classes. These are all ways that information becomes formalized and institutionalized. Throughout these lectures, I will be careful to distinguish between what art critics and art historians working in the modern period thought and what art historians today think about those very same works. You should expect a difference. The art remains the same, but every generation of art historians asks different questions, and we don't all agree on the answers. With that in mind, let's return to the mid-19th century and the differences between the mainstream academic artists and the avant-garde challengers. In 1847, Thomas Couture painted Romans of the Decadence, a painting that today occupies one entire wall of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. Couture was an academic artist, and his painting of ancient Romans indulging in an orgy in some kind of fantastical architectural setting was considered the highest form of fine art. He used references from antiquity, like the columns and the sculptures, combined with recognizable gestures and figures from more contemporary paintings to depict a story of lush overindulgence, exactly the kind of situation that would result in moral decay, despite the temporary satisfaction. He was not really talking about the ancient Romans as much as his own contemporary society. So the painting was a gorgeous reminder that without standards and values and morals, any society was headed for disaster. After all, it had happened to the Romans, and they had controlled the greatest empire of all. Moralizing in history paintings was well known and highly regarded. Much like the sophisticated political cartoons found in the New Yorker magazine today, these kinds of paintings relied on an audience who understood the historical and the contemporary connotations. His work reinforced the established and revered social and political rules of the time. From an aesthetic point of view, the painting was a superb example of outstanding academic expertise, elegant and idealized figures within a balanced and complex composition, complemented by elaborate and soaring architecture. The figures were well modeled, the perspective accurate, and the entire work had a very high finish, so that none of the actual brushstrokes appeared on the canvas. Couture was following the established rules for what and how artists should paint in order to produce the highest quality work. Not surprisingly, there were other artists working at the same time in France who were interested in painting different subjects, subjects they believed were much more relevant to contemporary audiences. Two of these artists were Gustave Courbet and Jean-François Millet. We are going to look at some of their work, and it may surprise you that even though their subjects have a lot in common, their styles are very different.